Well, good evening. It's Monday night, which means George. That way, George. Hi, George.
Hello, kia ora, how are we?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Why don't you bring up your screen that you're watching secretly in the background so nobody knows that you're a closeted monarchist? We are, obviously, as we are live, I don't want to use the word competing with, but at the same time as the Queen's funeral is going on, we are live streaming our show. So for both people who watch us tonight, I'm sure the rest of you will catch up on demand in the next couple of days. It's a fascinating thing, actually, because I think the life of the Queen can probably come into a couple of our conversations tonight. One is the National Party dropping the report on Sam Uffindel today. Some are accusing them of perhaps sort of trying to, make it go away more quickly than it is, with one of the world's biggest stories going on at the moment. But the second is it's Suffrage Day, the day that New Zealand women got the vote. And I don't know. I mean, we've got Suzanne Manning coming on to join us and have a chat about that. The role or the example that the Queen was over the past 70 years is a place of pride for women, perhaps. Pretty incredible woman. Whether you're into the monarchy or not, I don't think it can be argued that she had a service to give and gave it in a pretty amazing way.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, other people are saying that, and I'll leave that to them. They say it,
Fair enough.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm a huge interest in social anthropology and communication and the media, and so I'm fascinated in this sort of thing from that point of view, the ritual and the spectacle of it all. Just still it's the past week has been interesting for that regard.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think that the Commonwealth, having the Queen as the head of state at the moment, I know some people are really keen to get rid of it and become a republic, and they're like, why would you have the head of state living in a different country? But to me personally, it kind of feels like it's only symbolic now. I mean, whilst there's some rubber stamping going on, the Governor General has to open Parliament and that sort of thing. It's only symbolic. And if it was officially only symbolic, the pomp and ceremony, like what we're looking at right now, it's to think that this is 1,000 years of tradition to get to this point for this country of which we're kinned to on some level. And I'm not saying this, I know some people have a very different opinion on this based on colonialism and what's happened to Indigenous people around the world. And look, I'm on board with that conversation, but purely as a spectacle, as the pomp and ceremony, as the the ritual of what this is, it is. It's a very interesting anthropological kind of conversation and observation as well.
Yeah. Without getting too much into it, the symbolism is still meaningful and still material, right? Which means that the conversation should be had about a republic, right? That way of talking about it as symbolism is often used as an excuse to keep it around. It doesn't mean much. And if it doesn't mean much, why are you so keen on keeping
it?
Is what I'd
totally.
ask. Yeah.
I guess I'm one of those people that I'm like, we'll be a republic one day. Don't really care that much about it. Right. I feel the need to push it. Kind of like the Commonwealth Games. I kind of dig watching, Wills and Kate get married. It was quite nice, but it's nothing that I hold on to tightly and think that we should definitely stay a part of. It's just, it is what I mean. Like it's a fascinating observation.
We can still be a member of the Commonwealth and have Commonwealth Games. Like that doesn't have to go away.
Yeah. All right. And so tonight we are going to have a look at the Sam Uffindel story. And also, look, if you're a fan of the rugby, we had Chewie with us on Friday night, and love you to bits, Chewie, but the man who doesn't quite understand how to spell sports, let alone anything to do with sports. And the conversation from the All Blacks game has continued through the weekend. And really, I want to talk about it tonight for one reason. I've discovered a YouTuber that if you're a fan of the rugby, you must know about this person. He is amazing, and I want to share him with you. So we are going to talk a bit about what happened with the rugby from Thursday night, but of course there was some more light shone upon the story over the weekend, so it's still relevant to today, but also mostly just to introduce you guys to this absolute gold mine of a commentator I've found, and everyone will want to then go and like his YouTube page so you can follow him up when he's offering insightful opinion in the future to come. especially his insightful opinion around those people he disagrees with who happen to wear gold jerseys when they're playing rugby. Before we get into this conversation, I want to remind you that our Patreon is up and running and good to go. In fact, if you're already a member, thank you very much. I think about 20 people have joined up to Patreon, and I actually changed one of the things tonight on one of the levels. The good thing about it is if you join Patreon before the 1st of the month, which is about 12 days, that's when people's first kind of donations come out on the 1st of the month. We can actually tweak it and figure it out and get it right until then. So to be honest, what I did today was I went into the $35 a month Patreon or patron, and I added a benefit to that level, which is to be involved in our exclusive private group Q&A monthly, which wasn't there yesterday. So if you're a $35 a month patron, then you've just been had that added to your Patreon level, and we will keep tutoing with it to get it right over the next 10 days before people's first donations come out on the 1st of the month. Just go to patreon.com/Big Hairy News if you want to support us, if you want to support what we're doing, and if you want to, as the banner says, help us keep making independent news. All right, I think that's us for our little setup now. And I think what we're going to do, if I can find the actual website, is head off. Here we go. I want to invite our first guest on the show for this week from the National Council of Women of New Zealand. Suzanne Manning joins us. Suzanne, good evening, and thank you for joining us.
Kia ora, and it's a pleasure.
You got your eye on the funeral? Is that your cup of tea?
Yes and no. The family are in the other room, so if the internet gets a bit wonky, it's just because there's heavy in the other. But what you were saying about the Queen, there was one thing about the Queen that she did. What she did, she actually blazed quite a few trails for women just by being the only woman in a room and making sure that she wasn't run by the staff around her, but that she was the Queen and therefore she was the one that was going to be calling the shots in her realm. So, whatever you think about the monarchy, I think the Queen played her part well.
So do you think that she's, I'm trying to think about like a good example of females, of womanhood, of someone who's blazed a path for women in the last, she's, I guess, 70 years. There are things from within her lifespan that you could look to and go, man, she broke some ceilings, some glass ceilings there for women for sure. And if there are there any that come to mind?
Not specific events or anything, but just back in the 50s when she was the only woman in a lot of the rooms. And, I've watched The Crown, I think. But it was about getting her opinion to be taken seriously by the men in the room, because it's all very easy to sort of come in and go, oh, well, she's a woman because this is the 1950s. Why she'll be easy, but she was never easy to persuade to do. She had her own mind and she knew it, and she was very good at it. So.
Well, listen, thanks for joining us tonight. The reason we've brought you on board is on this day in 1893, in New Zealand, women win the right to vote. When the governor, Lord Glasgow, signed a new electoral act into law, New Zealand became the first self-governing country in the world in which women had the right to vote in parliamentary elections. So actually, not just a historic day, but a massively historic day all around the world. And we've asked you to come on board and have a bit of a chat about this. And I wonder, could you give us a bit of the background to what happened and why New Zealand did this? And I'll just say one thing before I open the floor to you, is because, I mean, maybe to my shame, I'm not very well informed on it. And you hear things around the place as to why women got the vote and who, quote unquote, gave women the vote. There's a common refrain I've heard by many. They said, well, women didn't really want the vote back then because it meant things like conscription and various responsibilities that came with it. So, you are someone who hopefully can give us all the facts and figures. So educate us. Tell us about how it came to pass, why it came to pass, and what happened when women got the right to vote in New Zealand.
Okay, so I'll try and do a potted history because people actually write whole books on this. And where you say that, women thought that, well, I'm sure there would have been some women in the country who thought that, because the women don't think alike. There are different people with different ideas, but the vast majority were not of that opinion. The vast majority were of the opinion that they wanted to vote. And you saw it with the number. I was hearing today that the suffrage petition that they got presented to Parliament as evidence that women wanted to vote, I can't remember if it was 25,000 signatures or 23,000 signatures or something like that. But in terms of percentage of the populations, that would be like getting 500,000 signatures these days.
Wow.
That's how many were prepared to put their name down on it. And then they had 6 weeks between the 19th of September and the election. They had to get women enrolled. And they got, I believe, 80% of eligible women were enrolled in that 6 weeks. And more eligible women voted in that election than eligible men.
Wow.
So the idea that women didn't really want the vote is not borne out by those sort of figures.
To help you out with the numbers here, I've just looked up nzhistory.govt.nz. The petition that was submitted to Parliament on 28th July 1893, it contained the names and addresses of about 24,000 women aged 21 years or older. So 24,000, they're saying.
Right. Yeah.
What was the sort of political and organizing process for this, Suzanne? Because we often talk about the theory and concept of political change on the show, and then the practicalities and this sort of thing. What was what in the lead up to the petition? I'm sure there was a lot of organizing and that sort of thing going on.
Oh yeah, they were massively good at organizing, and that's part of the reason that they were successful in what they did. They all around the world, they were talking about increasing the number of people who could vote. They were already changing from just landowners to everybody, and so this was a big thing all over the world in terms of men anyway. So the women jumped on board with this. There were a lot of women. The Women's Christian Temperance Union, the WCTU, were a prime driver here in Aotearoa. They had a visit from, and you can look her up because I forget her name too, but from the organizer from America came and did a tour in New Zealand, and everybody was like, yep, this is what we want to do. The women in particular were very anti the drink that was being real disruptive for their family lives. So it was mostly the men that drank, but not totally. And there was a saying that there were 2 ways to die. You could drink yourself to death, or you could die as a result of you could drown as a result of drunkenness. So there was a lot of anti the drink problem. So the WCTU had this idea that if women could vote, they could pressure the men to pass better liquor laws. So that was a starting point. But then there were a lot of people who were actually more interested in gaining the vote anyway, just because they were strong-minded women who wanted to be heard. And so they, through the Women's Christian Temperance Union, had unions up and down the countries, and that was a basis, but they spread out from there. They had other women's groups were starting at the same time. And so they just kept connecting, and Kate Shepherd was one of the forefronts, but there was a whole lot of people. But she was somebody who was very articulate and did a lot of the fronting of the campaign. Mm-hmm. But they were just in contact with themselves up and down the country. And women are great organisers. They just sort of like, it was committees and nobody was worried about, I can do this or I can't do that. They just went for it. Another thing, I was just up in Whanganui today. There's been a suffrage window unveiled in the district council chambers up there that the NCW Whanganui branch commissioned, which is really cool to see other women who were involved in the suffrage movement being promoted. So there was Margaret Bullock, Jessie Williamson, and Ellen Balance. And yep, that's the photo, that's the window that's up there, and that's the branch. And the thing with Alan Balance, so Mr. Balance was down in Parliament, and he was pro-suffrage, basically because his wife was telling him he was going to be pro-suffrage. And when you look at the stories, there was a lot of that sort of stuff. There was a lot of men who were responding to their women folks' desires. So what was happening was there was a lot of political pressure coming from women through the men as well. The women tended to be more invisible, but it was happening anyway. So there was a lot of that sort of thing going on, because of course, if you're going to get a suffrage law passed through Parliament, you have to get the men to pass it. So you have to get a whole lot of the men to actually agree. And then there were some things that worked against them. Like one man thought that women were such weak vessels that they needed representation so that they could be, they needed to have a say, just because otherwise who else was going to look after them? And so he was pro-suffrage, or it might have been actually the pro-representation, which came in 1919, because he thought women were so weak. And I think all the women thought, it was a stupid argument, but we'll take you both. Thank you very much. Not going to worry about that.
Hey, Suzanne, I'm wondering, do you know, like, the vote that happened that was only men for Parliament, and then the next vote that happened that had women voting in it, were the results very different? Like, was there a different kind of politician elected? Did it make any difference?
No.
Or did it stay pretty much the same because the system was already set and then women had to slide into the current system?
Well, when you're talking about voting, so when I say the vote for suffrage, that was in Parliament. Okay, so it was a male-only Parliament, so that was the voting there. But if you talk about the election that had happened before that, the male election, and yes, the men were a bit worried about how the women would vote, but actually you get a whole raft of women and they have a whole lot of different opinions, and so it pretty much comes out the same. And I mean, the same people were standing for Parliament. Women weren't allowed to stand for Parliament until 1919. And so you still had the same people to vote for. So actually, the election result was just more people voting, but the actual result was pretty much the same.
I was always thinking as well, I mean, would it be fair to say in 1893 that sort of New Zealand led the world in women's rights? Is that a fair analysis to draw from that? Like, how would we have been deemed? Like, if it was 1893, would we be now what some people would like to say the woke country of the world because these Sheilas have now got the vote? How would we be deemed by the rest of the world at that time? And were we at the forefront, the pointy end of women's rights then, or is this a very small aspect of women's rights and there was a lot we weren't doing?
Back in 1893, we still had sort of two systems going. We had Māori Indigenous culture, and we had the British colonial culture coming in. And so in terms of colonial culture, we were ahead. We were doing well. The National Council of Women, we started in 1896 because the suffrage women hadn't finished yet. And they,
Right.
they sort of transformed into this. But also the International Council of Women started up in America around 1888. And they started out with getting rid of corsets and big dresses that you couldn't move in. So that was some of the first things they were doing. While they were worrying about that, which we worried about a little bit too, but we were getting the vote. So we were held up pretty much as forerunners, this sort of thing. But if you go back to Māori society, before colonialism, women had a lot of say in the whole running of Māori society. So introducing colonialism was actually, for Māori women, a backward step, because suddenly they had this patriarchy in a way that was different to what they had. So they had a lot of they were silenced and made invisible, because that's how British women were seen.
Yeah, right.
So it was, for them, it was a backward step. Even
It's such an interesting kind of to think about, Māori women and how they can be with the warrior men on the front line, participating in various aspects of it, versus then thinking about the English woman sitting at home, needle pointing and that sort of thing. So there is conversations going on in the chat tonight about how and I'm paraphrasing a bunch of comments. How did suffrage actually help Māori women, and what happened there? Was this something that really just helped colonial women and nothing else, or where do Māori women fit in the story of this anniversary?
So at that point, it was, things were still sort of integrating, or integrating. Colonialism was still taking over. There's Meri Te Taimanga Kahia is one of the prominent Māori suffrage figures. And so around about this time, they were, or just a bit later, they were setting up Te Kaupahitanga, the Māori Parliament. But of course, it was set up as a Māori version along the same lines as the British colonial Parliament. So it's not how Māori would have done it pre-colonial times, but it was in response. And so, of course, because it was set up like that, it was without women. But the first chair, speaker, premier, I'm not quite sure, of the Parliament, Meri Te Taimanga Kahia was his wife, and she addressed that Māori Parliament, which the first woman to address Māori Parliament, and no British woman had addressed the colonial Parliament. So that was quite a big thing. And she said, actually, wahine Māori should be given the opportunity to elect the representatives of this Parliament. And she said, we should have the right to sit in this Parliament. Now, she was pushing for stuff that the British colonial women just, that was too beyond the pale. They were only looking at getting the vote, but actually being able to stand for Parliament themselves, they thought that was a step too far. Not for Meri Te Taimanga Kahia. She was like, this is what we need. And she was doing it. But that Parliament didn't last too long. It was basically the Māori MPs and Māori seats within the British Parliament. And so when women got the vote, wahine Māori got the vote along with them. But did it change much? I don't know how much it really even changed for the colonial women. I mean, there were so many things that later on, I mean, like, it wasn't until 1919 that we were allowed to have women MPs. And it wasn't until 1933 before we had our first woman MP, and that was from the by-election. And in fact, there was somebody who had predicted back in 1919, he says, it's fine, you've got women MPs now, But until you get proportional representation, it's not going to change. And
Right.
it was so right, so
Mm.
right.
Mm.
Yeah, so for a long time, yes, we got the vote, and then it's sort of like, oh, well, done now. Stop. Just sat back, did nothing for ages.
George, have you got anything else you want to ask about suffrage? I've got one more question that I want to ask Suzanne about, but
Yeah,
I don't want to cut her off.
I wonder what's been the sort of, you know, it was, I guess, born out of, you know, stuff around alcohol and obviously, you know, humans' right to representation in the governing system and all that sort of stuff. I wonder what, you know, as we got all the way to the 80s, and I think that's when you said the National Council of Women was started. Was that right? In the 80s?
1893.
Oh, the National Council of Women was started back then as well.
So the International Council, 1888, the Suffrage, 1893, National Council of Women, New Zealand, 1896.
Oh, right.
All in a few years.
Well, what I was going to ask is, I guess, more what the organisation that you represent, what they see has been the issues, and maybe, you know, maybe the last 50, 60, 70 years, you know, maybe beyond representation in Parliament or whatever it might be.
Like at the first conference of the National Council of Women, they called for equal pay.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I think, you know what? We're still calling for equal pay.
Mm.
And sure, there's been improvements and changes. So what has been granted when we talk about sort of just same job getting the same pay, and even that's not quite the case when you look at some places. But we're also now looking at different occupations which are women dominated or men dominated, you know. So equal pay is a huge thing. Safety is a huge thing. The right to be at a decision-making table, wherever that decision-making table is a huge thing. Women's health to be taken seriously, because I think we got onto that sort of topic last time I was here. We were sort of like,
I think we were
women's
Roe versus
reproductive
Wade.
bodies.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's right. And it's sort of like, oh, let's not talk about this because it's women's bodies. Actually, yeah, let's talk about this because we need it. So those are some of the big things. One of the big things at the moment is the increase in misogyny online and the harassment and the bullying. We have heard quite a few people from this, with these elections, who are not standing for councils, women who are not standing for councils, not thinking of elections next year because they don't want to face the abuse. And so where the trolls are actually trying to silence women, it's happening too many places. So there is actually a bit of a groundswell, and it's one of the things that we're trying to really pick up is to how do we find ways of stopping that, because women shouldn't be silenced.
Hey, just bouncing off the back of what George says, I've sort of a similar sort of question, but if in 1893, 1890s, we were sort of looked on by the world as a bit of a forefront, a bit of a leader, how is New Zealand considered now in the eyes of the world when it comes to women's rights?
We're still pretty good. The last UN, they look at a range of things, or is it not OECD? I think it is the UN, put out a ranking, and we were at 1.6, and then we dropped down to 9th, and I think we're up to 3rd or 4th or something like that. So generally people see us as good in a lot of things, but you do have to drill down on that. So like we keep saying with pay equity, so there is a gender pay gap. The gender pay gap, but it's not just gender, it's also ethnicity. So if you are a Pacific woman, you get paid a lot less, not just a wee bit less, but a lot less. If you're a disabled woman, you get paid a lot less. So whereas you might say the average is pretty good, what we keep pointing out is, yes, but look down at the details.
Very good. Hey, well, look, thank you for joining us tonight, Suzanne. Dr. Suzanne Manning from the National Council of Women of New Zealand. I mean, for the National Council of Women, is this sort of like a holiday? Is this like a Christmas Day celebration for you guys? Big things going on? Is it, so it's been a good day for you guys?
It has been a big day. It was also a big day last Tuesday. We had a parliamentary event where we celebrated 125 years of being National Council of Women. It's actually our 126th year, but COVID does things to people. But we celebrated 125 years last year, last week. So these 2 weeks have been massive for us.
Cool.
And this is topping it off. Thank you very much.
Yeah, save the best till last. Good save there, Suzanne.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you for joining us. I'm sure we'll be in contact again, and I'm sure we'll talk about more issues in the future. Loved having you on board and appreciate you giving us some time.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. See ya.
Some messages, and the messages have been busy during that, so we don't get to be able to represent all of them. The reason I paraphrased that question about Māori representation was there were several people talking about that issue, so I just paraphrased it. Here we go. Sai says, to get to the message to vote in such a short time frame is amazing for that time period. Telegraph/telephone was limited. There was no radio, and the roads network was limited and slow going. Simon says, I find it very probably fascinating in the first two US states to give women the right to vote were Utah and Wyoming. I wonder if that's fascinating because of Utah being the Mormon capital of the US, maybe. And Simon says a lot of women's suffrage movement was strongly for the temperance, and that was sort of talked about a little bit in that conversation. So thank you guys. Thank you for joining us, and I appreciate you being with us. George, do you want to check us in on the funeral? Do we know what's going on yet? Should we check in so people can just stay with it? Are they still walking slowly? That seemed to be going on for quite a while.
I think they've started the talking.
Okay, well, we won't do that. Won't quite do that yet. Let us go to, I guess, the biggest breaking story in New Zealand today, which is to talk about Sam Uffindel. Now, the story I'm about to show you from, I think it's from One News. Yeah, it's from One News. Talks a little bit about this, what I'm about to say, but there have been some calls, or certainly some questions over the timing of the release, semi-release, non-release of the information coming out about Sam Uffindel today because of course, the funeral going on. One wonders, accusations by several, that maybe National wanted this to be swept onto page 3 with the first, probably page 11 actually, with the first 10 pages being full of the Queen's funeral, etc., etc., etc. But there was a release today, and let's have a look at a story of One News to give us a bit of an update as to what actually happened today in the Sam Uffindel debacle.
Sam Uffindel welcomed back into the fold after 6 weeks in the political wilderness.
I'm very happy to be here representing the people of Tauranga.
Happy because he's been cleared of bullying.
There are differing accounts of what occurred, and Ms. Dew concluded the event was not as it was described in the media.
Now that is a really, really, really interesting framing. The event was not as described in the media. Does that mean the event was acceptable? No, not necessarily. Does that mean, well, instead of this amount, I mean, like just, pick a silly example. There was a fight in the street and someone got punched 40 times, including 10 times in the head. And that got talked about. And actually, they only got punched 4 times in the head. So the way it was being talked about in the media was not as it was talked about in the media. So what I'm saying is, without knowing the answers to this, and there's a reason we don't know the answers to this, I find that phrase to be quite calculating and a little bit concerning, George.
Yeah, because basically the crux of this news story is Luxon has allowed Sam Uffindel back into caucus because of what he has seen in a report that we have not seen.
Yeah, and we'll get to that as well. Let's just have a listen to that line again. And I don't want to be sort of like, this means bad, but what I want to say is, so much of the time politics is perception, and so much of the time it's not necessarily what they say, but it's either what they don't say or how they say it. And I think that line in particular, which gets mentioned a couple of times by a couple of people, is a telling line about what could be in the report.
And Ms. Dew concluded the event was not as it was described in the media.
So Christopher Luxon made the call.
I have never tolerated bullying in any team or workplace that I have led. I also believe in forgiveness and second chances.
The MP had barely entered the building after the Tauranga by-election.
I, Samuel Julian Uffindel.
Before a former university flatmate and her father accused him of bullying. He'd already admitted to being expelled for bullying at King's College, but that wasn't made public by the party.
Do you still have a stomach for politics? Has this put you off, or are you hungry for it?
I came here because I think I can make a difference. I'm not going to lie, the last 6 weeks have been incredibly
Has
challenging.
what put him off? Being a
But I
bully.
do have a stomach for it.
So how's that news gone down?
I guess being outed as being a bully. I do think it's interesting in the
What a
article.
fucking strange wording of a question.
I also think it's interesting that they talk about, he admitted to being a bully at King's College. Well, when he was outed, he admitted. It wasn't necessarily forthcoming to the people who voted him. So is that admitting? Technically, that's probably the correct word, but being outed and having to admit is probably more accurate. When you say, I've admitted to doing these things, what? Because 20 people dobbed you in and you had to acknowledge it. It's got a different weight behind it if you offer up something free flowing about yourself that's negative, and if you get outed and then have to acknowledge it. And that's so that was interesting wording in the article as well.
Down with the people.
The King's College beating has been like a side note in these stories today, which is interesting because the headline becomes Sam Uffindel cleared of bullying after investigation. A person just at a cursory glance seeing the news, suddenly they're the
everything's
King's
okay.
College. Yeah.
All right, we'll get to the end of this one news article.
He represents.
I think give the guy a chance.
I'm glad. Not that I'm condoning his behaviour at all,
But-
but I'm sure he's learnt a valuable lesson.
National got the report late on Thursday night.
Is today an appropriate day to release this report?
On Friday evening, Saturday and Sunday, Sylvia and I have had ongoing conversations through the weekend.
Doesn't it seem cynical, though, on the day of the Queen's funeral?
No, I don't think so. I think what we're generally saying is if I'd held on to a report for much longer, you would have been saying I've been holding on for something and information for way too long.
I think it was pretty disrespectful and definitely pretty cynical.
Sam Uffindel has also apologised for posing for this photo with a national badge at a Tauranga women's event before the party had decided his fate.
Like, it was a silly thing to do, frankly.
A new MP learning some very public lessons. Jessica Mackay, One News.
So David has also mentioned something which is interesting as well. And let me just say something about what David has said. David says, my understanding is he was upfront about the bullying to the party when he sought the nomination, but that wasn't made public by either him or the party until after the election. I have to say also, because we don't know the exact goings on, David, I agree. That's my understandings as well. But then when we heard about, the bullying involving getting chair legs, and several people using chair legs and beating another student, I feel pretty confident in saying that would not have been admitted to the party. So, George, I don't want to smash your illusions, but I can remember a kid when I was in Form 1 who got picked on and bullied a little bit. And to be honest, I probably said some things that I now look back as an adult and think it was horrific and bad. Said some mean things to a kid. I've been involved in bullying. Now, if that turned into the truth was actually we picked up chair legs and beat him, there's two slightly different weights to that accusation. I'm not saying any bullying's okay, but everyone says mean words at times to someone else in their surroundings. So I think you're right technically there, David. But I would be very, very surprised if Mr. Uffindel had actually admitted to the full scope of that bullying. And remember, when he was challenged and asked about that, his response was, I can't remember. So he's saying he can't remember whether he used a chair leg to beat another student. I find that hard to believe. I personally, my honest held belief, as we say in legal circles, I personally believe that you would remember it. And if you're not copping to it, that may lead some to a certain conclusion. There is also lots been written about this today. And let's bring up newsroom.co.nz. Luxon not keen on Uffindel reporting seeing the light of day. This is the other part that George has already hinted at. After refusing to release any details of an investigation into National MP Sam Uffindel, it seems Christopher Luxon would rather deal with a negative news cycle than throw sunlight on the reports. It is almost impossible to form a view on whether National leader Christopher Luxon made the right call reinstating Tauranga MP Sam Uffindel back into his caucus, while the independent report conducted by KC Maria, that's King's Council now, Maria Dew over the last 5 weeks concluded Uffindel, quote, did not engage in the serious behaviour alleged in the media. It was impossible to know what other behaviour may or may not have been raised during the investigation. Story goes on to say, according to Luxon, 14 people were interviewed by Dew and other written statements were also provided, but Luxon and Uffindel wouldn't answer questions about who agreed to an interview, although Uffindel acknowledged he passed on the names of his former Otago University flatmates to Dew. 2 weeks ago, Luxon told Newsroom the scope of the report covered any allegations from Uffindel's past, dating back to his school days, through to university and beyond. It is unclear how many of the 14 interviewed were witnesses or victims from Uffindel's school or university days, or from his life since leaving Dunedin. It would be a big call for Dew to conclude Uffindel didn't do anything wrong at university if the only people she spoke to were friendly allies who support the MP's version of events. It's also unknown whether any other allegations surfaced about his time at King's College or St Paul's Collegiate Hamilton, the school he moved to after being asked to leave King's College. And this is on stuff.co.nz. Yeah, this is what, and they've done a thing about what we don't know, and they've listed what we don't know as the terms or reference given to Dew, the information about if the majority of the interviews centered around Uffindel's time at King's College, University of Otago, or another setting, the report in any form, information about what did happen if the report didn't substantiate the university bullying claims, quote, as reported in the media. We also don't know who said what, and I won't bother reading that out because that's pretty clear. And look, my one thought around this, George, is that at the moment, National feels they have the right to go after Labour for not being transparent. You know, that's a common, especially because, you know, the Prime Minister pledged to be the most transparent, you know, government there's ever been.
She did in Obama.
So National has what they believe to be, you know, a good attack plan, the right to actually go after Labour for not being transparent. Now, not releasing this report means they don't have that right anymore because they're not being transparent. Now, my conclusion to that is this. It's an honest held belief, it's an opinion, but I would think something would have to be significantly I don't know if bad's the right word, but significantly warranting not being in the public eye for National to actively give up that arrow that they can currently fire at Labour. I would think that that's a really big decision to make coming up to an election, to actively now no longer being able to tell them that they're not transparent, tell the public that they're not transparent. So what is in that report that's serious enough to give National the thought we would rather not release this report and give up the right to say they're not transparent than release it? I'm wondering out loud if there's some serious stuff in that report. Maybe more things came out, and releasing it would do more harm to National than not being able to challenge the government for not being transparent. George?
Yeah, we don't even get like a whitewashed executive summary of the report or anything like that. They don't explain what they mean by as reported in the media, which I'm guessing they mean like the sort of, you know, vivid dramatics of the flatmate jumping through the window because he was banging on the door. I'm guessing that's what they mean, but we sort of have to do the guesswork there. And in terms, again, I think that's huge that this investigation was into, like, you know, his history of bullying, like his whole career as a bully. And so surely, there's you could imagine that could easily, something else could easily arise, although, to talk to 14 people that the people that National gave them. So, who knows? But you'd think if it was a favourable report, you'd at least flesh out a little bit of a summary.
Yeah. Yeah. So if there's nothing at all, what does that say about the report? Politikiwi's right, even though I think I've just set out a fairly fair claim that they can't do it anymore. They will still do that. The National will still attack Labor on transparency. But yes, as Politikiwi also says, it'll be hypocritical, and it will then be able to be called out for being hypocritical. But yeah, I actually agree, Politikiwi, they will still attempt it, but it won't have the same sting when any journalist can go, well, hang on, transparency, what about the Uffindel report? So it won't land as well now. Let's put it that way. If I take half a step backwards, but yeah,
as for the, sorry, Pat.
There you go.
Just quickly, as for the Freedom of Information Act, this is something that the National Party's, privately hired a bunch of lawyers to conduct, and so therefore I don't think it would fall under that. Otherwise, we would, obviously journalists would be onto it, and it would defeat the whole purpose of National not releasing it. So yeah, it doesn't fall under that.
But I think you've made a really good point, George, which is, if there was anything good in it, if there was anything really positive in it, they'd want that in the media. So to release none of it, it raises the question, what's in it? And as Paul says, hope someone leaks it to David Ferrier.
Yeah, I think it's, I don't know, National Party love to fuck with each other. We've watched them do it for, the past few years while they've been opposition. In terms of leadership stuff, I don't know how fucking over Uffindel and Luxon currently factors into anyone's plans, but you never know. It might be on the, in the back pocket.
Well, Chewie is absolutely convinced that Luxon won't be there at the next election. I don't agree with him. I think Luxon will be there at the next election. But if there was someone, Nicola Willis in the background who really wanted to give it a nudge,
yeah, maybe.
But I think that they got to try and win. And I think if they did roll Luxon, or, he didn't perform, that's just going to, that, in my opinion, that would be just the death knell for the next election.
What do you think about that sort of phase we had there for a while, where the national media was just the news media was just totally in love with the idea of Luxon, right? Exemplified by our sort of AM show, hate watching, that we did for a bit there. It was utterly obvious. It was very sort of obvious, and I can't remember a time they did that to one of the sort of sacrificial leaders that we've had along the way.
Yeah, no, true. Like Judith Collins or whoever else didn't get maybe quite such the easy ride. So yeah, that it's also funny now that I've used that phrase. All the people claiming what an easy ride the Prime Minister gets when you watch those interviews with the softball questions for Christopher Luxon. It's you can see it. You can see it. All right. Anything else you want to throw in there before we move on there, George?
No. I mean, as for the releasing it on the day of the funeral, I guess, I wouldn't obviously claim that that's disrespectful like Grant Robertson did, but it's definitely, good PR, because it sort of gets buried in the news as you iterated, Pat. So I think that was the point there in terms of that.
Especially, as you said, with the headline, nothing to see here, everything's okay, then even more so a chance to put it on page 11. But I mean, I actually even think that it's funny what you pick up on or what you see that maybe others don't, which means I'm probably wrong. But I think even Christopher Luxon going, we were working on this Thursday and Friday and Saturday. What you mean? So you could get it done in time to release on the day that the Queen was getting buried. Is that why? You know what I mean? Like, who does that? So work it on Friday, then start again on Monday. No, we work it on Friday and Saturday and late into the night. Yeah, so you could get it ready to drop today. Again,
the news story that is Luxon saying, "Oh, he's back." It's not. We keep slipping into calling it a release. It's what they want us to think it is. This is not a report release. It's basically Luxon chose today to announce that Uffindel would be back in the caucus. So that not a time sensitive thing. necessarily.
Remind you again that if you're keen to get involved, I can highly recommend you going and joining our Patreon. I noticed that from our conversation on Friday night, a couple of the patrons have joined in and says, great interview, Pat, with Chantal. Very interesting. She seems to be purposely blind to how her comments come across. This is for Chantal Baker, obviously. And as we've said, what we're going to be doing from now on is we're going to be putting any of our super long form conversations, long form meaning sort of kind of hour and a half plus, are going to be going on Patreon in their entirety, and we'll show clips in the show. It's really mostly a programming conversation. It's not necessarily because of the conversation only with Chantal, but that was the first. The Chantal was the catalyst for us making that decision. That was the first of what we'll do from now on. And also Simon, who was I think it must be a patron because he watched it, because it's on Patreon. Good evening, everybody, from earlier in the show. Your interview, Chantal Baker, very informative. So thank you, guys. So if I scroll this down, you can see that that's me, isn't it? Right there is the interview there with Chantal Baker. It has been edited down a little bit. I did say in one of the interviews to Chantal that we don't edit typically here, but I got to say this publicly so everybody knows there was never a condition of Chantal coming on that it wouldn't be edited. Right? I never said to her before Chantal came on to talk to me that this will not be edited. I did say it within the conversation because that's normally how we roll, but between recording that conversation and now we've changed our policy. So yeah, so to be very, very clear, there was no promise made to Chantal before the conversation about it not being edited, which was one of the reasons I was fairly comfortable to edit it and use it on Friday night in the show and put it up there. It's not edited a lot. It's gone from don't roll your eyes when you hear this, but it's gone from 2.5 hours to 2 hours. And it's really just a bunch of the kind of conjunctives and stuff, cut out bits and pieces here and there. It hasn't really lost any content at all. But there you go, patreon.com/big hairy news. You can come and be a member. And of course, if you're there this month, if you're there before the 1st of October, I'm going to do something special. I don't know what, because you'll be our OGs. You'll be the first people on board to be patrons for what we're doing. We'll figure out a way to give you a special badge or a special something as a way to say thanks for being the first ones on board for the first donation that comes out on the 1st of October. Right. I'm quite excited about this last bit, George. Now, you didn't see the game on Thursday night. Now, people are going what Thursday night? It's Monday. Thursday night game. I mean, we had Chewie with us. Basically, Chewie needs a disabled car park when it comes to talking about sports. So he's the wrong person to have here to talk about it. So we... And I wouldn't have talked about it for one of two thoughts, yeah? The first is that the conversation continued over the weekend and more things have been said. And the second thing is I found someone on YouTube that I want to introduce you all to, the most amazing person to talk about the rugby. So you haven't seen it, George? So what I'll do is I'm actually going to play a little bit of what happened. This is from Wide World of Sport, Channel 9 in Australia. Wide World of Sport has, in the weekend, this is from the weekend, released a different angle, different footage of what happened. And they've released this footage to kind of almost prove their point that this wasn't right and wasn't correct. I personally think this footage actually damns the Australian team even more. But let's just have a look at this 30 or 45 seconds of what happened on Thursday night. And then we'll talk a bit about it. And then we'll introduce you to hopefully someone who will be a friend of the show.
It is so hard to watch. Australian rugby fans are still in disbelief following that controversial call which cost Australia the Bledisloe Cup. Now, in an Isuzu D-Max key rugby moment, Sports Sunday can exclusively reveal unseen footage of a fiery exchange between Wallabies scrum half Nick White and the referee post-match.
So this is what happened.
Play on, please. We play. We play. Time off.
Okay.
We play.
Yeah.
We play. No.
Got a lot of permission.
I will switch on the time. Okay. And we play now. Time
on. Standing, waiting, standing.
10.
Referee told him again.
Like there's he had heaps and heaps of time.
So
and the warning.
Nick, I'm sorry. You know exactly what I want.
But I know.
You know exactly. I told you 2 times.
I know.
And then you still continue.
I understand, but he was just about to kick him for 2 seconds.
No.
Mate, that just cost us
Nick,
the rugby championship.
Can I speak? Yeah? Can I speak?
Anyway, now here's the thing, right? Let's just go back and have a look. So this is right towards the start of the situation for those people who haven't seen it. If there's one of you out there, oh George, this is after they've been given the penalty, and he tells the number 10 here to kick the ball twice. Then he calls the time off. Then he says to the number 10, kick it as soon as I start the timer. He starts the timer again, and he says kick it again. He doesn't kick it. He waits, and then he blows it up. But here's the damning situation, right? I'll show you what the damning footage is.
We play.
Have a look at the number 12 in the background. So he's just blown time off, right? Number 12 here, when he's in the background from the other angle. So he's telling him, kick it straight away. Kick it straight away. Time's back on. And he says number 10 again. Now look at number 12 in the background, because he knows. Watch. He starts screaming at the number 10. Look, kick it. Kick it. Kick it. Kick it. And then number 10 is like, fuck. And number 12 is like, fuck, why didn't you kick it?
Yeah.
So actually, if his own teammates are screaming at him, knowing sort of what's going on, you got to kind of go, you guys know what's going on. And I heard JK, Sir John Kerwin, talking about this on whatever the name of the Sky Sport rugby show is. And he said sort of no one's at fault here, because number 10 was wasting time, as every professional rugby player does in that situation. The referee had the ability and the right to penalise them, obviously with a scrum, but have a ruling against them for wasting time. But it's unprecedented that it's happened before in this situation. So it's like number 10 was breaking the rules. Referee was allowed to make the call, but it never happens. And so JK was kind of like going, it's a really weird situation. The breakdown. Thank you, Simon. Yes, that was on the breakdown. And I want to introduce you. So this is a YouTuber called Mr. FYA. And I just want to introduce you to this absolute golden man of a commentator. So this is a, what do you call it when you watch someone else's videos? A reaction video. So he's watching the same clip that we just took apart from. And I just want to play for you the absolute gold. Like, no matter how I explain or how I say it, this is how it should be talked about when someone within this commentary team says, oh, this is a professional rugby player in the middle here, right? Playing for the Wallaroos, I think they're called. She's like, if I was on the field, I wouldn't have known that rule. And this is the response that should be heard around the world.
You didn't know if that's a rule? Man, are these motherfuckers trying to piss me off? I bet nearly everyone who watches this video knows there's a fucking rule. If you don't, fuck, you're a dumb cunt. There's rules. How is this news? How is this something new? Oh, it's never been done before at this level. Blah, blah, blah. Man, fuck, no wonder why I hate the fucking Wallabies. You guys are fucking winners. When is a Wallabies fucking ex-player, Wallaby supporter going to come out and say, yeah, number 10 fucked it up. He ruined it. We could have won the Bledisloe. Someone tell me when.
Everyone has to subscribe. It's Mr. FYA. Mr. FYA is my new hero. We must get him on the show, George, to talk rugby, because has there been a more succinct, better commentary that you've ever heard before in your life? I love him.
Yeah, I love it as well. Before in the initial clip we watched, where the news presenter said that this was the ref's decision that lost the Wallabies the game, when in reality the All Blacks scoring a try lost them the game, right?
Yeah.
You the opposite team scored a try. Yes, this factored into that, but so did a whole bunch of other decisions that the ref made along the way, right?
Yeah.
A game is won over the course of the whole game, right? It doesn't, often it does seem like that in the narrative and how we see it, that it comes down to a single decision. But it's like like a world championship is won over the whole year, right? It doesn't come down to, it comes down to a whole lot of little moments like that.
And there was a moment within that game where a lot of commentators were questioning, was there a forward pass by an Australian to another Australian to score a try? I mean, that was never called back. And the Australian kicked the conversion really quickly to make sure they didn't have time for a replay. And, look, I understand that in the last two, like I watch a little bit of NFL and they have different rules in the last 2 minutes for stoppage of time and that sort of thing. And I think that there is definitely a case to be had for wasting time in rugby, but there's also a case to be had for consistency with that. I mean, I haven't seen this data, but someone says that there was a couple of times where the All Blacks were kicking the ball where they took 90 seconds and didn't get pulled up, and then the Australians get pulled up with 90 seconds to go. So it's going to be interesting. I think I also saw, I was on the breakdown as well, they were saying in the first half of rugby, the first 40 minutes of rugby, the ball was actually in play for 13 minutes. That means there's 27 minutes of rugby, and it took something like 51 minutes to play the half because of all the stoppages. In 27 other minutes of rugby, there was no actual rugby going on. The ball's only in play for 13 minutes. So if rugby ever wanted to be a worldwide sport and be, exciting to everybody, then they'll have to figure out how to get away from these stoppages, get away from this time wasting, and actually make it a game that moves more quickly and more consistently and more constantly as well. So, but look, I just wanted to introduce everyone to Mr. FYA because he's amazing. And if he ever sees this, hit me up, brother. But that's great. And also that reverse angle of the thing, I think actually puts to bed the conversation, because when you've got your own players screaming at you to kick the ball because their own players is watching the referee telling you to kick the ball and you're wasting time, then you don't really have a leg to stand on. Although we acknowledge it was a controversial time at the time and wasn't consistent with other rulings made in that game, as are many decisions, I guess. Alrighty, everything good with you, George? Anything you want to add on? It's lovely talking to someone about sports, not having this kind of vacant look through the camera from the other end.
Yeah,
but,
I mean, I hadn't seen that before. I was just taken aback by the amount of time that he did have. When I first heard of this, I thought maybe it was a bit more marginal, but there's that initial warning where the referee makes it clear how serious he is about it, right?
Yeah.
And then so you shouldn't be surprised when he says, "Nah, that's it, folks."
The one other question around this, not that it's relevant now, is like my old man was a rugby referee for 30, 40 years, president actually of the Auckland Rugby Referees Association for a while. And the thing he said to me on Friday when we were talking, he was going like, why wasn't it a penalty? I'm like, yeah, I guess that's the only other question, is if they've committed an offence to give the other team a scrum. We're trying to figure that out. Couldn't find that in the rules. Normally, if one team commits an offence, then the other team gets a free kick or a penalty. But they got a scrum, which was a bit weird, but it's still same result. Same result. They would have probably. That one thing that didn't show, George, was we got a penalty about 2 minutes out, very kickable penalty, and that could have drawn the game. But the All Blacks went for the corner, and then didn't score off the drive. In fact, off the line-out drive was where Australia got the penalty that they were supposed to kick then. So if they had gotten another penalty, would they have gone for the corner again for the win, or would they have gone for the kick for the draw? I don't know. We will never know because Geordie scored in the corner. Oh, and the other thing is there's no blame on the All Blacks. Like the underarm, the Aussie underarm, that's completely, the blame for that is completely on the players. Whereas this, it's all about the referee. There's nothing that the All Blacks done. And you're right, they still had to score the try. Australia still could have won that if they had have kept the try out, but they didn't. But it does set up for a fascinating game this Saturday night at Eden Park. So it'll be really interesting. All Blacks win with a bonus point, then they won the rugby championship. If they win, then South Africa win the rugby championship. And if Australia win with a bonus point, they can win the rugby championship. So it's set up for quite a good last weekend of footy, actually.
So
Anywho,
that us in the Springboks, is it?
Yeah, I think we're against Australia
weekend.
Again. Yeah, we're against Australia again at Eden Park, and all three teams could end up winning the rugby championship. I think there's probably a technicality that Argentina could still win it as well, but they need to score like 80 points or something. So it's not mathematically, I think they possibly still could, but realistically.
I'm already looking at the odds. You can probably see, Pat. I'm already looking.
I can see yours. What are we saying? What are the odds for? What are they? Because All Blacks haven't lost at Eden Park for since the 1990s. So what have they got? Australia? Oh, they got New Zealand at 120. Wow, I don't know if I'd go that much of a certainty. That might be worth a flutter on Australia, brother. $4.20.
What about
1 to 12? How much is it?
280 or Australia 1 to 12.
The All Blacks really have to get a bonus point. If they get a bonus point, when you've in a game of sports ball, when you've got the ability to control the outcome, if they win with a bonus point, I'm pretty sure that means they've won the championship. So they really want that bonus point. So they'll be going for All Blacks 13 plus. But yeah, I don't know if it doesn't feel like it's that much of an easy win for the ABs, $1.20, whatever it was. But yeah, sometimes you see those numbers and you kind of go, like playing the stats of it. If it's more of a kind of 60-40 chance, then that means actually $4 for the Australian win might be worth a wee wager.
That's a good bet. All right, that we've locked it in. That's our betting corner for the week.
I used to bet against my teams all the time because then I used to think if my team wins, I'm happy, but if my team loses, I get a little payout and I'm still happy as well. It used to be a philosophy I had for a little while. All right, guys. Oh, Paul's saying we should do a BHN watch along. Yeah, we could do that one day. We'll get Case Muse to come down and we'll do it with him from down the hill. All right, guys. Hey, good to be back with you again tonight. Lovely to have you on board, George. I feel quite masculine now seeing we talk sports and not just like technology and that kind of crap. So we will head off and we will catch you all tomorrow night from 10 p.m.
Suffrage Day, feeling masculine.
Yeah, Politica, you are 100% right. That is exactly where the Patreon money is going. Straight to the TAB. No question whatsoever. We'll catch you tomorrow night from 10 o'clock for another edition of Big Hero News. And thank you, George, for coming on board. And thank you to Suzanne Manning. And remember, one of the ways you can support us is with Patreon. But the other way you can support us is to share our shit. Tell people about us. Tell us what we're doing. Tomorrow morning, I'll be making a clip with that Suzanne Manning conversation. Share that around off YouTube. Follow me on Twitter. And if you follow me on Twitter, you'll get all the clips and stuff when they come out as well. Or, of course, you can just subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's an easy way to do it as well. All right, team. All the best. We'll catch you from tomorrow night. Thank you, George. Thank you, ball boys. Thank you, umpires. Have a good one. Hooroo.